going to talk about at a high level are the GUI or the CLI, the broker, and the node, and the cartridges that we're going to write live on the node. The GUI and CLI talk to the broker through the REST interface. The CLI talks to the nodes over SSH for either logging in or doing Git. And the broker and nodes talk together because the broker provides all the orchestration for the nodes, for your applications, gears, and all that good stuff. So from our point of view, where does your code fit? We've got applications that are written by the application developer. They are made up of gears. Gears are the provenance of the PaaS developer. And cartridges, which are what provides the services, are written by cartridge authors. So to date, the cartridge authors have always been within Red Hat because the original cartridge packaging required root access. So we couldn't very well open it wide open and have everybody write their own cartridges and have root access to our systems. That kind of makes Dan nuts. So the new system takes care of that. The idea is when a cartridge, you're encapsulating something. So it's packaged software. It's either software you include when you do your cartridge, sometimes we do that, or it's something already on the system. Our API is very low. We do convention and configuration because they're both good. We've got a set of files that we're going to talk about that are executable. I don't care what code you write them in. We use Bash because it's fast. And we put together a Bash SDK that you can source. What it is that it's a library of Bash functions that, for code reuse and all that good stuff. We use standard error and standard out. So in your Bash scripts, you send errors to the error, out to out, and it's then presented to the application developer when they're running our CH commands. We have a whole slew of environment variables. We use environment variables as a cheap database. So the environment variables tell you what IP address you got in the 127 range. They tell you what ports you can use. If you're talking to a database, the application, if your cartridge talks to another cartridge, that information is carried there. We carry 2 configuration files, a manifest YAML, and we're going to look at those where we define your service and your cartridge. And managed files is another one where we have a lot of functionality that you can take advantage of that the platform will take care of for you. You don't have to do your own. Minimal manifest. You need to tell us what your name is. Cartridge short name. Why do we do 2? 1 is the name you're going to give to humans. The short name is the one that gets used when the system is building environment variables for you. So that one you want to kind of keep nice, short, all caps. It's going to show up later when you're doing things. Version, you need to tell me what version of software you're packaging. So we're packaging dog, it's the first version. We turn around and do cartridge version because you're packaging a software. So dog version 1 is what we're packaging in cartridge version 001. So we take care of that so that we can do auto upgrades and all that good stuff. And we have a cartridge vendor, and I'm writing this, so it's me. So that is configuration. Convention, you have files. The root of your cartridge, you've got a bin directory, and it has setup and control. Setup, things you want to have happen when you get instantiated. So that's where you may create your .prcs, your what does Node call them? NPMs? Yes. Those directories, all those dot directories that all of these VM web frameworks like, that's where you would do that. env, that's where the environment variables are going to get placed. And then the metadata directory is where you're going to put your manifest.yaml. So we combine configuration and the convention is there. This is really small, right? Just kind of a base example. None of our cartridges are near this simple. Well, I take that back. I guess Bill's switchyard one is. So great. We installed it. But it's not telling anybody how to go find it. So what we're going to do is in the manifest, we're going to define an endpoint. Private IP name, you say, we default to IP, we're lazy. So what's going to happen is when the system reads in this manifest, and the end user says, the application developer goes, I want to instantiate this. We put OpenShift, short cartridge name, IP. So that when the application developer writes, he knows he can use OpenShift short name IP. And this is from the short name from above the manifest. That's the IP address that he actually can use safely. So we use an environment variable to hide that information, encapsulate it, so that if it gets moved, it doesn't bust.
So with the V2 cards, rumor on the street is that you can have multiple public ports now. Is that correct? And if so, how does that work? Right? Is that too complicated for this part of the talk?
Please. So yeah, I could spend way too much time on that one. But the answer is yes, it can.
Okay.
It happens because when you set up, you're going to get multiple privates, and then they get mapped back and forth.
Okay. How do you get those ports? Like, do you just make it up, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So I can say like 35,000.
Right.
Okay.
But if we don't like it, and the reason I kind of hesitate is V2 just went out Tuesday. We find out there's some issues that if you create too many of them, we just refuse to instantiate your cartridge.
Okay. One last question.
Sure.
If I make up 35,000, how do I know as a cartridge author what the proxy is going to pass, what port it's going to use externally, or is that the external input itself?
Yeah.
So the external and internal would be the same at that point?
You get the external one would come through in the proxy port. So you would do some other name here for proxy port, and that that environment variable would get set with the port that was actually made.
And it will actually pass track also.
But
to what point? Yeah. Most people just need a couple, right?
Exactly. If you
Okay.
do a couple, you'll be fine. You get greedy.
What if I want to do 66,000 of them?
Yeah, you'll definitely get punished. You notice the front end and back end are both double quotes. We're just saying we're going to map from the home URL / back to /. You could do things like health, or you can actually do rewrites. So the back end one is the one that you are setting up for the application developer. The front end one is the one the system's going to look for people coming in from the public side. That makes sense. So you can map public to private and have whatever you want. The control script is the one where we expect to find at least start and stop. We ask you that whatever we call you with, if you don't want to implement that message, just return 0. And the Node platform will happily go on. It doesn't care. It told you to do something, and you came back and said, yay. We don't care. You don't want it? If you fail, we ask you to return a 1 and put something on standard error. Then that'll trigger the node to say, I got to go tell the application developer that whatever he asked to do failed, and we'll return the response back. Is that a question? Okay. So combined with the two, the manifest, the endpoints, how you tell the node platform where you want to live and how you can do. Control is what the node platform is going to come back to say, I want you to do things. Control scripts can be trivial. We have some that have gotten very, very long, depending on what they're trying to do. But in general, I gave you start because if you're doing like a PHP or something that is HTTP based, all you really need to do in start is start the HTTP server. Stop, restart. So notice that, again, we have the OpenShift configure. We start building on doing these environment variables that are all named the same, so you can pick them out easily. Very few services are all that exciting by themselves, right? We almost all web applications want to talk to a database. We do the inter-cartridge communication, and notice that this could be in a scalable app on two separate gears that are talking on potentially two separate nodes. Or if you're doing a non-scalable, this will all be on one gear. We use a pub/sub model. The database cartridge has to be written to say, I want to publish some kind of information, and then we'll look on the other side, it's going to subscribe. When we publish, we have a type that's environment variables, that it's a network TCP, it's a database connection info. Then we're going to write a script called publish DB connection info. We're going to put that in the hooks directory, and he's going to echo out the information of host, port, and URL. Platform's going to take that and say, great. I'm going to now notify everybody in your application who is subscribing to publish DB connection info. One thing I do need to point out is we don't have a hard and fast rule about format. So when you look at some of these things that get a little hairy, that's an area where we want to work on. On the subscribe side, we do set DB connection info. So you publish on one side, set on the other side. And notice the type is the same that it was before. That's how we hook them together.
I'm not sure I'm understanding this. You need to do this to allow MySQL, for example, to be embedded in your cartridge, or just if you're going to have a database as part of your cartridge at the base level?
Just if you want to talk to a database as part of your cartridge.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the deal here is you're signaling to the platform. The database puts out what he wants to publish, and you put in what you want to subscribe to.
Okay.
And the platform, when it instantiates new cartridges in the application, looks and says, do I have matching types?
So unless I put this in my cartridge, even if someone embeds MySQL into my cartridge, it won't work?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, that's a little bit of a lie, is that if you have two or more cartridges, and someone else said that they subscribe to MySQL, then you would see it. But
Okay.
if it was just you and MySQL.
So I see if I created like a PHP 5.6
Mm-hmm.
cartridge, which OpenShift doesn't support today, and then embedded PHP my admin, which it does, that would
Right.
subscribe, and then my other
Yes.
would get, okay. That makes sense.
So we don't verify that you're absolutely correct. So occasionally somebody will write up a bug going, well, I did this, this, and this, and it worked, but I did that, and it didn't. It's like, well, that's because this wasn't quite right.
So if I understand this correctly, it's for communication of cartridges that are added to the same application, right?
Yes.
Is there something equivalent for cross-application communication?
No.
Cross gear.
If they're cross gear within the same application, yes, we do that with this mechanism. If they're
Cross gear within the same application.
if you have an application that's
On
scaled
multiple gears,
on
okay.
multiple gears, we take care of that. We don't do application A and application B.
The only way to do that would be to maybe expose one of those other ports,
Yeah.
and having it public and then doing like a tokenized authentication.
Correct.
So it isn't possible to share a MySQL database between two applications?
Not two different ones.
Not two different ones today. Anything else?
So is that also part of how it routes the traffic between nodes through HA proxy? Like if two gears are on two different nodes and it has to go across?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question in a different way. I know it's not possible today with the MySQL cartridge, but couldn't you, with this new cartridge spec, create a new MySQL cartridge that exposes its 3306 port externally, and then you would be able to connect to it from anywhere, right?
So you'll like this answer. the node, on the node you can do that. We have that ability. But none of the upper layers allow it yet. So we're setting ourselves up for being able to use something other than
So
HA proxy.
that would get severed at the proxy tier,
Correct.
the top level proxy tier. Okay.
So there are things now that the node can do with this refactor that the upper levels haven't caught on yet. And part of that is we're looking for Dan for some security and some stuff like that.
Okay.
So once we start incorporating some of his new ideas, then we can move that stuff up the stack. Oh, he was asking if he did a new MySQL cartridge and exposed through the public port 3306, could he still then get a high availability MySQL between two applications?
But from my understanding, unless it's HTTP, it will not flow to your cart no matter what, right?
Yeah.
So you couldn't, it's just HTTP traffic, that's all you can do today.
Yep.
For external ports.
So if we got to the point where you were allowed to get a real IP address to a particular, then you could start to do that.
It's the stuff that Krishna was talking about, will that?
Potential for stuff that Christian was doing too,
Okay.
you would be able to expose it. You'd have to route that IP address. Right now, we're not routing any IP address.
Right.
That's all it goes.
So we hear you. We're just
No, I think all this stuff is great.
Just
compared
think
to-
so.
Yeah.
So, how to customize workflows, right? Because we admit, as many application developers and cartridge developers that exist are going to want to customize workflows because they're going to have something different they want to do for all of them. So, for cartridge authors, what we do is we have a bunch of the control script I showed you. I talked about start, stop, restart. In the cartridge developer's guide, which I'm not going to go through the list today, there's probably another 8 to 12 other actions that will be called against for control. And they include build, what happens before build, what happens after build, what happens before setup, what happens after setup. We have a whole unique script for an optional script called install. So the idea is that if you're writing a database and you run setup, on the initial gear instantiation, there's also things that you only ever want to do that first time. Loading database schemas, creating SSH keys, any other kind of security things like that that only ever happen once. You would put those in the install script. The setup script then gets called on every upgrade as well as every install. So it's because what we found ourselves doing when we were writing these and started porting the V1 ones is we have if statements, right? If this file exists, that means that I'm on my, I've already been installed before, so I can skip this area. So one of the things we did with the refactor was say, okay, we're going to separate these and say if you have things that you want to install just once, we put those in the install script, and then setup is called on every instantiation and every upgrade.
So is that the recommended path? Let's say you, for whatever reason, and you wouldn't want to, but create a WordPress cartridge, right? An actual WordPress cartridge versus a Quickstarts. That section would be where if you always wanted the latest version, you would download it, ungzip it, and move it over.
If you wanted it to be the latest version the day you did the instantiation,
right.
Yes, that's exactly the thing to do.
Okay.
So we kind of get into that with Node especially.
Yeah.
Everybody always wants the latest and greatest Node. So the
Way
deal
too
is,
hard.
if you want to have the latest greatest Node on the day you do the install,
Yeah.
put it in the install script. If you want the latest and greatest Node every time an upgrade of the PaaS happens, put it in setup. Because at that point in time, we run setup every 3 weeks. And we will go through every cartridge on every gear, and we'll look at those cartridge version numbers. And if they're changing, we'll be like, okay, we got to rerun setup. And we'll crank through it that way. Application developers also get a chance to play. Using the Git repository, Is everybody familiar with the .OpenShift directory and the Git repository? Has anybody seen that?
Markers is new.
So we have two things. We have action hooks and markers. Action hooks are where the application developer starts jumping into the workflow. So I told you we had like a build that you as the cartridge author were going to implement on how to build for the package software. So like for a JBoss application, this would be a Maven build. With hooks, there's a pre-start there that can be written, that the application developer can do something before the actual start happens, or in a build, a pre-build. He can get his 2 cents in before the build happens. This allows everybody to have a good time, right? Application, as the cartridge author, you set down the basic stuff. If you need to jump in to the workflow, you can jump into the workflow. Then the application developer can also jump into the workflow where he needs to. So where this has been used a lot in the past was like the Quick Start or WordPress. A lot of the Quick Start examples would rewrite parts of these action hooks to get into the system because there was no way at that point in time to have cartridges. So if you're doing a quick start and you needed to jump in the workflow, you can do that. If you've got a lot of action hooks doing a lot of stuff for your quick start, that's probably a sign that you need to be thinking about writing a cartridge. Just because you're so involved integrating yourself with the platform, that a cartridge are probably easier and easier to maintain. Markers are how a cartridge and the application developer communicate. So hooks are more about the platform and application developer. Markers are more about you as the cartridge author and the application developer. So some of the markers that we support, and this is one of the things that it's up to you to do whatever you want. For JBoss, it's picking between Java 6 and Java 7. The concept of hot deploys. So I told you that you're going to implement a build. Hot deploy is the idea that you're not going to destroy what you're building into. You're just going to build over top of it.
So is Git cartridge designed then to listen for those markers and then modify the script accordingly?
Yep. But there's no hard rule about what those markers are, right?
Or what they mean.
Or what they mean.
Yeah.
Now, we'll talk to you if you start doing really obscure things with the markers. And as a community, if your hot deploy doesn't do what everybody else's hot deploy does, people are going to install your cartridge once and then go, thank you for playing.
Can you make up your own marker that only your cartridge listens?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill, what's the one JBoss does that's really off the wall?
Enable JPDA port?
Yes.
Yeah,
There you go. I knew there was one that was in there. So the deal is that application developers either write these scripts, create these markers, they commit them to their Git repo, and then they push them up into the gear with their code, with their source. Future, we're looking at ways to do that without necessarily having to do it through the repository, but right now that's the way we do it. You wrote this great new cartridge. It's on some great new framework. Everybody loves it. How do they know they love it? Is that you gave them a sample application. The idea here is that we have a template directory, which is going to be the initial Git repository when the user creates their Git. So they go, app create, blah, 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 in the RC. When that cartridge gets added into that gear, this template directory, and I'm literally saying the word template, that's what we called it, is where your sample app for your potentially web framework lives. So that when the user then gets an URL, when they do their show, domain show, they can immediately connect and see that it worked. Instant gratification. This is about you doing work to make the application developer know that he's on the right track, that it works. So as opposed to getting the blank wet Apache thing, this is showing the Apache welcome sign, right? If you bring up any of the Red Hat cartridges and you install them, you get the same looking welcome to OpenShift, and here are a set of commands. If you want to copy that, great. You want to do your own thing? Great. We don't care. The one thing I do say is that we have a field in the manifest, initial build, install build required. Sorry, got changed. The idea here is that if your cartridge's sample application is so complicated that you can't have it pre-built and living in the repository, that we will do a build for you when we install it. I will, sounds great, sounds wonderful. Has one huge drawback, is that that time for that build counts against your cartridge create time. So every time somebody installs one of these cartridges that requires a build, the application developer, the end user is going to be like, this cartridge starts slow. It's because we're going off and doing a full build for you. Some of the JBoss stuff, Maven, that can take 3-4 minutes. So that will count against you in their view.
So the template directory.
Yep.
That is just raw files, not like your initial commit for the Git repo that gets pushed out.
If it's named template, it's raw files,
Okay.
and I will build a bare repo for you.
Okay.
If you name it template.git, it can be a bare repo.
Okay.
And if you make it template.git, your cartridge will install even faster, because I don't need to do the bare repo for you.
So for things like a JVM-based cartridge that actually does have to compile,
Mhm.
let's take the stock JBoss, EAP, or AS7 that we have today. Are we actually doing that build, the Maven, or what?
No, we actually bundle the war in the cartridge because I don't, exactly what he just said, I don't want to do a Maven build when you create the cartridge because that initial Maven build has to populate the M2 repo and then
Okay.
download
So it says a pre-built war already
Yeah,
underneath, but
pre-built
it just deploys.
just to avoid exactly.
And that's just it. I mean, we do that work, as cartridge authors for the application developers to make their experience better. I'm asking you to do the same, but I'm also telling you that if you don't want to, you don't have to. But it will, like I said, you'll get a ding. Some of the example environment variables that we have. Well, we like our name, so we put OpenShift in front of everything. That also helps in when we load up the environments, you only get one environment space per application. So if we namespace everything with OpenShift in front of it, then we don't have to worry about colliding with other application required environment variables. I'm thinking Jenkins Home, JDK Home, Java Home, M2 Path. I mean, there's a whole list of these that other application services say, this is it. So we move ourselves off out of the way. Application name, I mean, that's the one that the application developer, when he wrote it up, said, this is what I want to be called. We give that to you so that when you're generating error messages back to them, you can include that piece of information. Or MySQL, when we create a database, we create the database with the application name. That's our choice to do that so that they don't have to be confused. The data dir is a safe place for you and the application developer to write data within the gear. Now, be frugal. Every PaaS is going to have some limit on the amount of data that can be within a gear. I mean, it's the whole idea of gears, right? We're constraining resources. So if you try to write, terabytes of data into their data directory, they're not going to be real happy with you, and they'll delete you. And as an author, software author, we don't like that. The other one that gets the OpenShift short name dir. Short name again came out of the manifest. You told us what to use. The dir directory is your cartridge's root home directory. So gear directory is where and then all the cartridges live under the gear directory. This points to your cartridge directory. So when you're writing scripts, you can just say OpenShift dogdir, and that goes right to, starts right at that directory.
So where's that actually live today, though? Like if I SSH in, I see app or even runtime.
Correct. If you, so the platform does a lot of magic for you, and one of them is building environments. So right now in V2 land, we have a global PaaS-wise environment that's etc OpenShift ENV, where people like Adam can write environment variables into. They will get sucked in when your code runs and when the application developer's code runs. Then there's gear level environment variables that go into the .env directory at the gear home. Then there are environment variables that go into the cartridge directory env that I showed you on the first slide. So these, like the environment dir, live down at the cartridge level. You don't need to worry about that. That all gets compiled up, and when your scripts are run, you get that unique environment for that cartridge owned in the proper SC Linux context so that you can't go play games with anybody else. So one of the big features of V2 land is us taking a step back. For anybody has anybody run Create App before? So in the past, you did RCA Create App, dog 001 here is the application name, and you gave it -t dog -01. You gave it a type because all of the cartridges were owned by us because they manage root. With this, you give an URL to the manifest. The manifest has a source URL that we expect will point to a tarball or a zip of your cartridge source. So the combination here is the broker that was up in the upper right corner of my first slide goes and gets the manifest. He brings it down and says, okay, it's a good manifest, we like it, it's got the files we need, and he starts the process of combining it with the application name and then sends it to the node for instantiation. He picks the node, nodes are oblivious. The node turns around and reads that manifest and goes to the source URL and starts downloading the blob. I put down there as tips, if you have your cartridge as a GitHub repository on its own, you can use the raw pointer to your manifest directory and manifest meta directory manifest file, and then you can point to the zip URL, and we'll pull that down and install it for you. So any cartridge that you want to write, we don't care, because when we run it within the context of the gear user. Now, we're going to fix that a little bit later so that it's a little less cowboyish. Right now it's pretty cowboyish. Somebody's trusting you when they do that download. If you hose them, you're going to get a bad name. We do things when we're processing the manifest files. I showed you that managed files directory. We make sure that if you tell us to go off and delete a file, that it's in your cartridge. We don't let you go delete files in other people's cartridges. But that's just in our code. So if we put a bug in there, sorry. But that's one of the things you want to be careful about. Additional resources. I thought this was going to be, I wanted to make sure and point you to that tiny URL points to our writer's guide. It is a work in progress. It is a markdown document. If you have any additions that you want to bring, we're more than happy to accept them. It covers all of the gamuts of writing the cartridges, all the alternative control options. It covers the hooks, and it covers the markers that we have and how they're deployed. It also has a much more extensive list of the environment variables. On Freenode,
You could just drop the
I just had to switch over to another wireless.
Yeah, so if you're trying to get into the wireless right now, they just switched on password protection. The secret code is Red Hat, the passcode, the secret. I think it's all lowercase, I'm just testing it now.
Okay.
I apologize.
Heinz works too.
Yeah, Heinz is what I'm using.
they haven't found their password yet.
It works.
I just got in using the passcode Red Hat, all lowercase. You have to give it your name, so you refresh your Wi-Fi and you should be in.
So on Freenode, the runtime team likes to hang out on OpenShift dev nodes. If you have, if you start writing cartridges and you have questions, if you want to ask us what we were thinking about when we wrote some piece of code, we'll probably plead ignorance and blame it on someone else. That's always a good one. We also hang out on OpenShift dev. That's kind of generic OpenShift development. The node one is pretty much just the node guys. The OpenShift one is where a lot of the users hang out. So if you start writing cartridges and people start downloading them, application developers, that's where they're going to come asking questions. So if you get into this, it would be great for that. Our email is dev@openlists. OpenShift lists, OpenShift.redhat.com. Why is that so hard?
One other thing.
Sure.
I'm going to talk about Quickstarts, and I'm sorry I already said this. The distinction between a Quickstart and a cartridge, and why you should write a Quickstart.
So in the beginning, Quickstarts were great because you didn't have to have root access to make them work. With these new cartridges, I think Quickstarts are going to go away.
Yeah, I think so.
Or they're going to at least diminish. The way I look at it is if you can write a quick start and you don't have to write any hooks or any special stuff, then write your quick start. If you find yourself, though, writing a lot of hooks and action, the action hooks, and you're going in and you're doing kind of some fancy stuff, and especially, and I know anybody who wrote a V1 quick start, if you were looping for a database to come active, which that was the only way to really get it to work for some things, that's screaming at you that you want to be a new V2 cartridge. Because what you want to do is do your setup in the setup part, and then that looping for that database, you want to do that in install. So we've blurred the lines. I think eventually we'll probably, I don't want to say that we'll put quick starts out of business, but the complex ones, definitely. It's much simpler once you catch on to the V2 cartridges than writing quick starts. Because quick starts were a way to finagle things. And don't get me wrong, part of the reason that we could sell the V2 refactor is quick starts were so popular. That, everybody was writing these things, and it's like, well, why do we have two ways of doing something when we can simplify our lives and do one? And what we did was a lot of our secrets, I don't want to say secret sauce, but if you look through the V1 cartridges, there was a lot of redundant code that was called in those bash libraries. We pulled all that up into Ruby and wrote this platform layer. So we went from a really thin platform layer on the node to a good-sized thick one. And all that common code's up there. And it's unit tested now because, unit testing bash is kind of, I don't know, some people say it can be done, but it tends to be a little brittle. Not that, our unit tests occasionally don't get brittle. But we have functional tests, so we have a lot more automated testing going over that code now than we ever had before. And we're going to keep that going.
Let's explore that just a little bit.
Sure.
Because I hope you're right. But let's think about quick starts, and let's take, what's a Java application? the popular, Liferay, okay, is a popular CMS for Java. So today there's a quick start for that. As a cartridge author, if I wanted to...
No, there isn't.
Oh. Hypothetical. Let's take WordPress. Okay, WordPress is a PHP application.
Mm-hmm.
In order for me to write a WordPress cartridge today, would I have to do the heavy lifting of making the cartridge scalable, or is there a way to depend on the existing PHP cartridge and then just add my stuff on top of that without having to just take the source code for the PHP and basically just changing the template directory and the build to prep the DB? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you were to write a WordPress cartridge, you would claim dependencies in the manifest for MySQL and for PHP.
And HA proxy, I guess, or not?
Well, scalability is something that the application developer gets to choose because they're the ones
So as
paying.
a cartridge author, I don't have to do anything to make my cartridge scalable? That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay.
Knock on wood.
You're right.
If it's simple scalability, right, if you're really doing like JBoss, you have to do stable applications, stuff, and scaling has more to do with just scaling, then yes, but.
So yeah, I mean, that's the reason I chuckle. It's like scalability is one of the areas where we're still working on how, with software, right? When you're trying to provide it to people, you want to take something complex and make it super simple for them. Scalability, we're still working on making it super simple. If it's like PHP, where you're just a bunch of people talking to a database, that's going to work fine. If you're going to try to run off and do your own clustering beside HA proxy, you're going to have to do the heavy lifting.
Okay. So let's come back to the WordPress. What would be your suggestion to develop a cartridge of that kind, right? Which is just a simple PHP application with a database running on the existing PHP cartridge that exists.
So if your cartridge declared dependencies on the other two,
Okay, PHP MySQL.
so when the broker started doing the install, he would say, okay, I need this, and then he'd bundle them up and install those two first, then he'd install yours.
Okay, so when you define that dependency, is it like an RPM dependency, or do you specify a YAML file as your dependency?
In the manifest, I don't have an example of when I bring it up.
But we will have time to do that.
Yeah, maybe I'm
My
taking too much
last-
time.
My last initiative down there on my lightning talk is I want to do a Drupal 8
Okay.
alpha quick start, which is why I started this question. Because I wasn't sure after your talk whether I should be doing a quick start or a cartridge. I think I'll start with a quick start and then get that working and then flip it in. But I think that's
Right.
a good example of something that needs PHP, needs MySQL, and Drupal, except Drupal doesn't really scale without a
Yeah, we're still working on that one.
I know.
So, but whether you do the from code for a quick start, or if you just give the URL for a cartridge, at some point in time that's going to become very blurry. And like I said, for me, it's kind of, if you can do it in a quick start and not have to write a bunch of action hooks, but once you start writing action hooks or the database looping thing in a quick start, that's a dead giveaway. You should probably be a cartridge instead.
One last question, then I'll
Sure.
shut up. Has anything changed with the V2 as far as the scale up event happens, or is it still the same rsync? Or does cartridge authors have any control over what gets rsync now? Or
No,
okay,
we do what we want to do.
yeah.
We did do one improvement with scale up, is that we used to start the cartridge, stop the cartridge, rsync, and then start it again. And now we don't start it, we create it, we rsync it, and then we start it.
Okay.
So while your control didn't improve in that arena, the
Overall,
that's one of the areas where V2 is actually faster than V1. There are other areas where V2 is slower, and we're going to work on improving those. For cartridge development, very apropos for this group, you can bring up an origin VM that Krishna back there builds diligently, and do your cartridge development there if you want, as opposed to online. If you do, The areas I showed in the first slide, the arrows, I recommend looking at varlog mcollective.log for error messages between the broker and the node. And for the node talking to your cartridge, either the platform log or the platform trace log. Those are the, kind of the, if you're not getting back expected error messages, those are the 3 logs that you can triangulate on to figure out what happened. And then you could drop me an email going, I did this, and this is the weird error message that got logged. Why did it not show up for the application developer? And we can work on getting those error messages out to the application developer. I put these down as a warning, but I'll leave that as you. Origin is a Fedora 18 image, and online is Israel 6. So, crap. All right, I'm behind. And I only bring that up because when I talked about cartridges being a way of packaging software, you need to know your target. If you send an online, you write a cartridge that depends on PHP 5.4 and try to install it online, it's not going to go well. We don't have PHP 5.4 available online. We have 5.3. So those are the things when you're targeting for your audience. You're targeting for your PaaS. If you're not including the software with your cartridge, you need to know what your target platform is. The Python 2.7 and 3.3, we actually download those binaries with the cartridge. So, and the last one is...
Actually, what you just said is not actually the case, because if you depended on PHP 5.4 for your app, wouldn't you package that as part of your cartridge?
You could, yes. That currently is your only alternative to get to online. What I was trying to point out was if you declared a dependency on 5.4 and you tried to push it into online, it's not going to be there.
Yeah. Okay.
And you'll get back. This arrow points to our online cartridges. They're all open source. They're all available. You can go through those, use them as examples for what you want to do. I did call out some things. The JBoss EWS does multiple versions within one cartridge. So it packages both versions of EWS. It also supports multiple Java versions through marker files. So it's one of the more complicated matrixed ones of like, okay, I want to do this version of the package software and I want to run with these marker files. So it's a nice complex example. MySQL is going to show you the pub/sub examples, and PHP MyAdmin is the one that has the dependencies checking in for you. So, if you follow our example and write Bash, I definitely recommend using -E and -U. -E stops the script on the first error, as opposed to running until the end of the script or an exit. So a lot of times, if you're not careful with Bash, you'll get an error and just keep going on. And then -U, for any undefined variables, you'll get an error. If you've never written Bash scripts with -U, it's very powerful, but it takes a little bit of getting used to. Some examples where people do the $ variable with a -C, or is there any value in there? That fails because it's an unbound variable. And if you use the -X for debugging, that will show up in the trace log file that I talked about, so that you can see exactly what's happening in your cartridge run. And then we provide the Bash SDK. How are we doing time-wise?
The beer is getting cold.
Cold. So,
That's a good thing. The beer is here, so as soon as you're ready to wind down, there's beer.
But no
waiting.
pressure.
no pressure. I have some of these last slides that are kind of just, general things that we do. One of the things that we added with V2 is we used to have a bunch of sed scripts in our V1 cartridges that would go through and make substitutions. And we found that a lot of people weren't all that comfortable with regex. And we'd have a lot of wild errors that happen. So when we did V2, what we did was we settled on ERB processing, because we're a Ruby stack, so that made sense. And in the managed files, you can have a section there that's an array of templates that will walk through your code looking for these files and do substitutions, ERB processing on them. So if the file is named .erb, we'll process it, and then we'll promptly delete the DRB and leave the rendered file there. Where we use this a lot in our own cartridges is HTTP conf, where you want to go through and substitute that application name, potentially the home directory, pointing at configuration files. Using this, the system will take care of all that substitution for you, and you don't have to worry about it. It is run at safe level 2, so we only do environment variable processing. If you think you're going to write random Ruby code and get me to run it in its root, it's not going to happen. So all the environment variables will always be available for you when we call one of your scripts, even set up, except for the ones you create yourself. And then the ERB processing happens. And that happens in a fork exec. So not only do I run at level 2, it's a fork exec of that SE Linux container. So
Beer.
it's beer time. If I'd known, I'd have given the last slide as beer time.
That's very good. Thank you very much. All right, so everybody grab a beer, open it up, take a break, and then we're going to go right into some lightning talks. So, Brian, you grab the first beer. Yep. You have to do the lightning talk with a beer in your hand, unless you don't drink. So you can have Coke or something else. Thanks, John. That was great. And